What's up, guys? I got Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, extended edition. I got the special features.
Hello, welcome to the appendices. As you probably know, the book The Lord of the Rings has got appendices as well, which Tolkien used to present a lot of the backstory and the origins of how he created the mythology of Middle-earth. And in a sense, our appendices are doing the same. On this first disc, you'll be able to see how Tolkien created the story and how we began our process of interpreting his book. The second disc of our appendices covers everything from when the cast got involved through the process of filming, post-production, and ultimately the release of the movie. Now, if you're like me and you don't like necessarily trying to navigate your way through DVDs, there's a button you can press called Play All, which will allow you to sit back and just watch the 2.5 hours of documentaries that we have on this disc all in just one run. And then on the second disc, if you press the Play All button, you get 3.5 hours of just documentary material straight through. But please be aware that if you do that, there's also an additional hour's worth of video material and a couple of thousand pre-production drawings, paintings, photographs accessible through the main menu. And there's also the index feature, which like a book is basically a list of everything on the DVD. So I really hope that you enjoy sharing our journey through the making of the Fellowship of the Ring. I've always thought it was remarkable that Tolkien basically spent his entire life creating what he called the secondary world. You know, he created the languages, he created the thousands of years of history. It's so rich and so detailed that nobody today that writes a piece of fiction is ever going to come close to the sheer wealth of information and detail. Of course, all of that makes it fiendishly difficult to adapt into any sort of movie.
Behind one of the most ambitious film projects in history is the extremely popular book, the result of the life's work of one man. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was born on the 3rd of January 1892 in Bloemfontein, South Africa, to English parents who had emigrated there. Just a month after his 4th birthday, when John Ronald was in Birmingham visiting his grandparents, his father, Arthur, died suddenly. Tolkien became half-orphaned in a country he didn't know.
The absence of a father would have affected him. In a way, he became the father to his younger brother. He was raised by his mother, who he was very close to.
In 1904, Mabel died from complications arising from diabetes. Tolkien was only 12.
After that, he was shuffling from one place to another with only a guardian to look after him.
There were something like 10 different houses he lived in the city. That life is quite a complicated one, quite an eventful one for a child.
His mother had been his first teacher, encouraging him to take an interest in words. Her death cemented his study of languages.
And I think in those circumstances, the school really was the refuge. It was the stable element in his life. And I also think it was a particularly good school for the likes of Tolkien. The school, I would say, was not remarkable for literary development, but it was very remarkable for producing linguists.
He formed a close bond with 3 school friends, and together they created the Tea Club of the Barovian Society, known as the TCBS, a small club based on the mutual love of heroic legends and sagas. This close friendship and shared interest in ancient languages continued throughout Tolkien's time in Oxford, where he went in 1911 to study English language and literature. But this idyllic period came to an end with the outbreak of war. Tolkien departed for France, serving as a lieutenant in the Battle of the Somme. Likewise, all of his close friends were drawn into the combat.
He had a small group of close friends, and a few years later, nearly all of them were dead, all killed in the First World War. Once again, he found himself on his own. How could it not have had a marked effect on the way he wrote and the way he thought? And people do say that the major theme of his writing is death.
During rare moments of quiet, he jotted down stories in a notebook, which he called the Book of Lost Tales.
That's where Middle-earth was born. Some of the very earliest writings of Middle-earth that Tolkien created were done in pencil on a notebook while he was in the trenches.
Tolkien's love of languages would eventually lead to him creating his own, and his lifelong pursuit of creating such language engendered the desire to create his own mythology.
He felt deeply that England lacked a mythology.
Well, England has no overriding mythology. We have a lot of folk tales, and we have borrowed a lot of other people's mythologies. The one that everybody regards as English is the story of King Arthur. But actually that's a complete mishmash from different sources, many of them French, our old enemy. So for Tolkien, the Romance mythologies were a very difficult thing. He didn't feel that they should be part of English folklore or mythology at all.
He really mourned the fact that any mythology that England may have had been basically eradicated by the Norman invasion in 1066. There was this vacuum that Tolkien wanted to fill by inventing his own English mythology. Right at the end of his life, he was still working on the mythology of Middle-earth, and he died with his great sort of life work only partially complete. The Silmarillion, which was the story that he was writing in the trenches in 1917, wasn't published until after his death, and his son Christopher had to step in and do the finishing touches.
Yet during his lifetime, elements of this mythology would reach the world through his novels. Tolkien returned to Oxford in 1925 as Professor of Anglo-Saxon, but 9 years later, an unexpected and seemingly innocuous event would change the life of this Oxford Don forever.
We have a story about Tolkien inventing hobbits. There he is, marking his examination papers, which is extremely boring, and he turns over and he finds a blank sheet and he writes on it, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." And that's the start of the whole thing.
And so, the story of this small, nature-loving creature found its way into print.
Well, my father was the publisher, and he believed that children were the best judges of children's books. He used to pay me, as a supplement to my pocket money, a shilling. So The Hobbit came along, and I wrote my report. It wasn't a great piece of literary criticism, but it was good enough. My report on The Hobbit was dated the 30th of October 1936. Bilbo Baggins was a hobbit who lived in his hobbit hole and never went for adventures. At last Gandalf the wizard and his dwarves persuaded him to go. He had a very exciting time fighting goblins and wargs, and after a terrific battle with the goblins, he returned home rich. This book, with the help of maps, does not need any illustrations. It is good and should appeal to all children between the ages of 5 and 9. In those happy days, no second opinion was needed. If I said it was good enough to publish, it was published.
With the success of The Hobbit, Tolkien was encouraged by Stanley Unwin to write a sequel. He thus began to delve back into the mythology he'd been working on his whole life, and it became The Lord of the Rings.
He sat down and began to write the first page of The Lord of the Rings without any planning at all. There was no scheme, no synopsis. I've been through all those first drafts, those papers which all still survive. And it's perfectly clear that he was flying blind. He never intended it to be what it was, and it gradually shaped itself as he wrote it.
To be a convincing story, you've got to know.
The Lord of the Rings is regarded sort of as, the Tolkien masterpiece. He only regarded it as being a very small piece of the mythology.
It was only just the tip of an iceberg. He knew, and he'd written and put in the box files, an awful lot that never was in his lifetime known to anybody.
It also gives Lord of the Rings its enormous depth, and that is what somehow makes it transcend a piece of fiction, and it does feel much more authentic. Basically a lifetime on creating the world behind the fiction.
I desired to do this for my own satisfaction, and I had little hope that other people would be interested in this work, especially since it was primarily linguistic in inspiration and was begun in order to provide the necessary background of history for Elvish tongues.
This was simply an outlet for his huge imagination, which had been stimulated by philology, by studying Germanic languages, by studying Norse sagas, by studying Anglo-Saxon poetry. And that drove him not just to be a scholarly investigator of it, but to be a creator in the same genre.
The first volume of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Fellowship of the Ring, was published by Allen and Unwin in 1954. It had taken Tolkien 12 years to complete his epic work. By now, he was nearly 60.
He was exacting to a degree on how the book was produced.
He was extremely stubborn and obstinate, and he wrote it the way he wanted to.
You did not go around editing Tolkien. That would have been the absolute final sin. After all, he was a professor of English language and literature and knew what he was writing. I had very carefully made my estimate of losing £1,000 on the basis that there would be a fall-off. There wasn't. In fact, by the time we got to publishing Book 3, we had increased our print number and on the way to reprinting 1 and 2.
Over time, the book increased in popularity, eventually becoming the 20th century's second most read book after the Bible.
He was both pleased and gratified by the success, but it wasn't because of the money. He was gratified because it proved his point. And there was an element in it, I always said, of Schadenfreude. You know, they told him all his life that he was a kind of, flogging a dead horse. And it wasn't a dead horse, it was a Derby winner.
Tolkien fan clubs began to spring up almost as soon as the book became well known. Not quite as when it was published. It was published in the 50s, but by the 60s they were starting to appear.
You began to go to New York subway and see sort of inscriptions on the walls saying Frodo lives. And you began to realise that something was happening.
And people were writing him letters telling him that they had adopted the names of his characters and they were getting married in ceremonies based on his books. And he was actually very upset by this because he was actually able to detach himself from his own invention.
The phenomenon of the Lord of the Rings continues today, and its popularity can be attributed to fundamental themes of human existence.
The themes of Tolkien are another way of honouring the book because, as we were saying, there's so much detail that you ultimately can't recreate the world of the Lord of the Rings, with everything in the books, but the thematic material is obviously critically important to translate that from book to film because the themes are ultimately at the heart of any book. And Tolkien's themes in particular were in his heart.
There's a tendency to expect too much of Tolkien and to expect answers that he never intended to provide. And there's a simultaneous oversimplification of what he wrote.
Tolkien himself was horrified at modern analogies being placed on his work. He always rejected the notion that the stories were based on World War II and the rise of Hitler and all that. I think to apply modern political thinking on a story that is essentially 50 years old is a little bit inappropriate.
Tolkien's famous for disliking allegory and maintaining with great force in his foreword to The Lord of the Rings that this is not an allegory.
As for any inner meanings or message, it has in the intention for the author none. It is neither allegorical nor topical. I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations, and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experience of readers. I think that many confuse applicability with allegory, but the one resides in the freedom of the reader, and the other in the purposed domination of the author.
What he means by allegory, of course, is that you can have a one-to-one substitution. So the ring equals, nuclear energy. That kind of simple-minded interpretation is exactly what he was trying to avoid, and it's part of his genius that he didn't write an allegorical book. That's what I think Tolkien himself personally was quite pessimistic. But I think there's hope in the books. This is a phrase Tolkien used, by the way, hope without guarantees. A very good description of what his book offers. Despair is for people who know beyond any doubt what the future is going to be. Nobody's in that position. So despair is not only a kind of sin theologically, it's also a simple mistake, because nobody actually knows. In that sense, there always is hope.
That's what's interesting about this story. There's no guarantee at any point of success. That's something no one can predict. What will happen. Even Galadriel, when it comes to it, in so many words, says to Frodo, I can't tell you what's going to happen. I don't know.
More so than just being a straight struggle of good and evil, it is a struggle over loving the values of your world and being prepared to fight to the death to protect them.
It seems to me that the ring wraiths are Tolkien's most original and distinctive image of evil. And since he's a philologist, I think we should think about the word wraith. All right, what's a wraith? Well, it's actually related to words we know. For instance, it's related to wrath, which is anger. It's related to wreath, which is a twisted thing. It's related to the word writhe, which is to,
They actually, in a sense, have no lives of their own. They're totally dependent on Sauron and on the One Ring. That's an interesting aspect of Tolkien's view of evil. Kind of a moral vacuum, a lack of independent life.
This is something which is very distinctively modern. People of Tolkien's generation had a problem identifying evil. They had no difficulty recognizing it. They had to live through it. But the puzzling thing was that this seemed to be carried out by entirely normal people. And indeed, Tolkien, who was a combat veteran, knew that his own side did things like that too. The nature of evil in the 20th century has been curiously impersonal. It's as if sometimes nobody particularly wants to do it. In the end, you get the major atrocities of the 20th century being carried out by bureaucrats. Well, the people who do that kind of thing are wraiths. You start out with the good intentions, but somehow it all goes wrong. So it's a curiously distinctive image of evil, and I should also say it's a very unwelcome one, because what it says is it could be you. And in fact, under the right circumstances, or I should say the wrong circumstances, it will be you. When people say that this kind of fantasy fiction is escapist and evading the real world and so on, well, I think that's an evasion. It's actually trying to confront something that most people would rather not confront. We can never be quite sure about the ring, which I think is entirely appropriate to the story. Right at the start, Gandalf asks Frodo to hand him the ring, and when Frodo passes it over, it feels very heavy, as if either Frodo or the ring itself was reluctant to pass it over. Now, which was it? Was it Frodo or was it the ring? People start off with good intentions. They want the power in order to carry out the good intentions. But once they've got the power, they won't give it up, and the good intentions turn increasingly to bad intentions.
The ring is also very contemporary because I think it has a profound affinity with technology.
He had a real problem with technology. He described once that the most evil creation ever visited on mankind was the internal combustion engine.
Technology is very powerful, very seductive, very addictive. The whole of society becomes incredibly dependent on technology, so that when something does go wrong, it goes very wrong. Tolkien had a respect for the earth that was profound. The thing about Middle-earth in Lord of the Rings is it's like a character in itself, with autonomy and subjectivity, and that's a profoundly ecological point of view. He did not agree at all with this view that nature is simply a passive set of resources for us to use as we will.
During his lifetime, you had continuing urban expansion. You had urban creep.
The city was going through enormous changes. It was gradually becoming the city of 1 million people. He could see the city creeping up the hill.
So that the area which he lived in, which he remembered as lush and pastoral and beautiful, really became absorbed into a major industrial city.
All those processes are still happening, and in some respects they've gathered steam. Things are going faster and faster in that direction. And in that sense, Tolkien's relevance is bound to increase.
For myself as a reader, what I find in there is a story that is timeless. And this is why it made it so accessible to so many people.
As filmmakers, as writers, we had no interest whatsoever in putting our junk, our baggage into these movies. We just thought we should take what Tolkien cared about clearly, we should take those and we should put them into the film. This should ultimately be Tolkien's film, it shouldn't be ours.
J.R.R. Tolkien, creator of the universe. Moved to spirit.
I first read The Lord of the Rings when I was 18. I loved the book, thought it would make a great film, assumed that somebody one day would make a live action film and that I'd get to go along and see it.
I did find it was probably one of the first literary experiences that sort of really taught me the meaning of how powerful the written word is.
You know, I read the books when I was in sort of 20s, and so it always left quite a vivid memory.
I got hold of a copy from my dad when I was about 15, and he said, I'll give you about 6 months to read it, and I think I read it in about 2 months.
I've been a Tolkien fan ever since my mother first bought the book for me when I was 12 and said, I think you might like this, have a read of this.
Yeah, well, I first read The Lord of the Rings in 1961, and at that point I was totally blown away from it. It was my first year in college, and I thought, this is something like I've never seen before.
The first copy of The Lord of the Rings that I ever owned was the paperback edition that had a still from the Ralph Bakshi film on the cover of the Black Riders galloping out of Bree was the image. I remember it really clearly. I've probably still got the book somewhere.
Virtually everyone in a significant position on the movie knew the books inside out, had been obsessed with them for years.
The first thing that Fran and I did was to take the 3 books of The Lord of the Rings and to break it down into what turned out to be a 90-page treatment.
I read that in the middle of 97 and immediately was stunned that they'd actually managed to. There was Lord of the Rings, essentially Lord of the Rings. So I became a believer.
It was our first pass at really cracking the code of The Lord of the Rings, is the way that I sort of think of it, as basically, you know, saying, well, the book is a great book, the story is a great story, the characters are great, but it's unfilmable, and it is unfilmable. If you were to just shoot the book page by page, scene by scene, it would just be a mess.
Here you've got a book that's 1,000 pages long. It encompasses a different geography, all kinds of races of beings and creatures. It's a book that took the author 15 years to write. This is a challenging book to try and put on film.
You know, I always find that literal adaptations don't work. I think you've got to find what you think is essential to the book and make your movie of that.
And in that way, you know, things started to happen, like, you know, lines that Elrond would say in the book were given to Aragorn to say in the movie. You know, a line that might appear in Lothlorien was suddenly, you know, put into the minds of Moria. But they're nonetheless, they're still Tolkien's language. It's still his words.
Miramax, of course, were the first people to finance Lord of the Rings. Credit has to be given to the fact that they were strong-minded enough to take on this incredible task.
We wrote the first screenplay. We immediately going to start working on the second screenplay.
And sort of towards the end there, Miramax was starting to say, well, we really feel like we want to do it in one film.
And Peter said, there's no way I can tell this in one movie and do it any justice, so I can't do that.
And luckily, Miramax was like, hey, okay, fair enough. Well, you can go ahead and see if anybody else is interested.
We had one chance of continuing with the project. And I said, we've got to somehow convince somebody to make 2 Lord of the Rings films. We've got 4 weeks to do it.
And Peter trotted off to Hollywood, and he went to many of the studios and called upon his old friend Mark Gordesky, who was an executive at New Line. And Mark set up a meeting with Bob Shaye
Bob is impossible to read. He's a completely inscrutable sort of meeting. And you can't really tell how well you're doing. So we made this, Peter and Fran made the presentation, showed a lot of mock-ups, showed the tape, played the tape, lights came up, couldn't read the situation at all.
Bob looked at Peter and said, "Now, Peter, why would anybody in their right mind make 2 movies?"
Which shattered them both because they didn't quite know what he meant. He said, "This is 3 films." Well, thank God for that decision.
Once New Line were on board, we had to basically take our 2 scripts that we'd written for Miramax, and we had to now reorganize these into 3 different movies. And that really involved a total restructuring, page 1 rewrite, basically. Philippa Boyens. She's one of those people that had read Lord of the Rings like once a year, every year, since she was 16 years old, and knew everything about Lord of the Rings. And so we invited Philippa on board.
The collaboration between the 3 of us came down to Fran and I working incredibly closely together, locked in the hotel rooms, locked in the office at home, getting the work done. Fran then taking it to Peter and reshaping. And often we'd come to bits where we knew there was action involved. So we'd just go, they fight. And that turns into 20 minutes of the finished film. Because you just knew Peter was going to come along and do it brilliantly. And the reverse, I have to say, is true. Peter did that with the kissing. He would just say, he'd just hand it over to us and say, well, that's your department.
There are probably some times when it was a bit of 2 against 1, when it was actually Philippa and Fran, going against him, Peter, and he's like the only guy with these 2 women sort of pounding away on these issues.
It tends to be me on the laptop, because I'm the fastest typist. I'm sorry, guys, but I am. Fran always, she likes to write by hand, and her scripts are the ones that are covered with writing. I like to keep my scripts really clean. It's scrawled all over. So she's usually sitting on the floor surrounded by notes, surrounded by the scripts, and lots of paper. And Peter would be, when he was shooting, he'd generally be lying on the couch completely exhausted because he just shot right through the week, and this was his day off, and he was working on the script.
The script was literally being rewritten, I'm not exaggerating, every single day and week for the entire 15-month shoot. I would get pages faxed to me several times a week. We were constantly updating them, partially because of the interaction with the actors.
We used to go around to Pete's house, which was great. And whoever was involved in the scenes, we'd go around and kind of chat through what that scene's about. And through that, a lot of the script kind of morphed into something else,
Pete and Fran and Philippa sat us down, Billy and I primarily, and said, write down anything that you are doing that is making you laugh, and try and link it in with something in the book.
There was a lot of plot lines that we sort of fleshed out, had ideas about certain specific characteristics more than anything. The idea of Frodo kind of playing with the ring and what would happen to him.
Philippa and Fran were great. They were so enthusiastic. They were so happy to I suppose, to be working on stuff like we all were. But I mean, there was great enthusiasm and passion in how they spoke and how they wanted to work with you. And you could ring them anytime, night or day. And if you had a problem, you could discuss anything with them.
I can remember going out to dinner one night and Philippa and I sitting at the end just dreaming, and her asking for a napkin or a matchbook from the restaurant just to write it all down on, because it was, beautiful stuff what we were coming up with.
Sometimes you would start a scene one day, and under your door at night there would come a few rewrites through. When I say a few rewrites through, I have 2 file boxes that big, filled with rewrites. I have to tell you, some are still in the envelopes unopened, because I was sometimes so tired I thought, oh hell, never mind.
The actors who were now starting to own their characters were, firing ideas to us, which, some of them are good and some of them aren't, but you certainly gratefully accept the good ideas, and And this, Fran described it as furiously laying the tracks in front of the train. It was as it was rumbling up behind you. There was no stopping the train, and the tracks just had to go down.
It made for a degree of sort of controlled chaos. The artistic result was terrific.
The immortality of the elves, and we want to track the journey of the ring to being lost. And you can't do it in more than 4 pages. And so that's what I did. I sat down and I thought about it. And that's where history became legend, legend became myth, and some things that should not have been forgotten were lost. That's where they came from. That survived, actually. They rang me back and they were great. They just said, "We can't believe you just did that."
There are lots of things in these films which are not in the books. And I think in most cases, there are other people are going to complain about the absence of Tom Bombadil. Sad, yes, but I mean, this could go on and on and on and on and on.
And the plot of The Lord of the Rings, in our movie, in its most simple form, is Frodo carrying the ring. Eventually has to go to Mordor and destroy the ring. So, what does Old Man Willow contribute to the story of Frodo carrying the ring? What does Tom Bombadil ultimately really have to do with the ring? I know there's ring stuff in the Bombadil episode, but it's not really advancing our story and not really telling us things that we need to know.
And if you look at the edit, we don't know that they didn't go into the Old Forest. We don't know that they didn't meet Tom. Conceptually, we just don't mention it. It's just left untold, is what how I like to conceive. One of the hardest characters to come to grips with initially was the character of Arwen.
She has a very small part to play in the books if you simply look at the number of pages.
The appendix, and wanted to draw on the appendix and the story between Aragorn and Arwen and her choices.
There's a snippet from the Lay of Luthien, the song about Beren, the mortal man, and Luthien, the elf maiden, which was a story that is mirrored in the relationship between Aragorn, mortal man, and Arwen, immortal elf maiden.
Who is she? This woman you sing of.
'Tis the Lay of Luthien, the elf maiden who gave her love to Beren, immortal.
So we have gone into that appendix for ideas and material which we can actually incorporate into the plot of the movies.
One of the keys to adapting something of such wealth of detail to film is that everything needs to do more than one thing. We were trying to bring Merry and Pippin to life more, talking about ideas to do that, and I just said, well, Merry and Pippin should steal a firework and light. It's become a character in the movie in and of itself. It ends up having personal relationships. It has a relationship with Frodo, has an intense relationship with Gollum, has a powerful relationship with Gandalf and Galadriel. This ring is evil, a presence right within the Fellowship.
They will take the ring, and you will beg for death before the end.
Being able to work on these books, which I love so dearly, it was working with Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh.
Peter and Fran's sort of relationship as sort of filmmakers is ideal, really, because Fran is so good at putting words down on paper, and Peter's so good at putting those words into vision.
Peter and Fran are a great team working together. They actually they live and breathe the project, and they managed to keep a family life together quite successfully.
Fran, who you're probably not seeing on this, is for a very specific reason, and that one of them needs to remain private. And Peter, by the very nature of what it is that he has to do, is the public face of that partnership.
My abiding images of seeing Peter early in the morning sitting in his trademark shorts with unkempt hair, poring over Tolkien. And I would do the same, and I think the other actors did too.
Yeah, everybody was respectful of Tolkien and mindful of the novel, and had the novel in hand, physically. It was with us. Even at the end, the last day, you'd see copies laying around the set.
we were incredibly lucky to have that as source material, that as reference material, that kind of Bible to keep turning back to.
Ian McKellen was there, and he had the book in his hand, and he came up to me and he was like, "Remember, Sam grabs Frodo's hand. The fans will know."
With our script writing, as every draft that we wrote, it became closer and closer to what was in the book. It became nearer to Tolkien.
They tried a lot of different things, and sometimes they were thought of going in a different direction from the book. And every time they tried to do that, gradually they find that actually Tolkien knew what he was doing with the story, and they would start going back to where he had started.
I mean, there are things that sort of happened that I don't think were even within Peter's control that ended up changing the film and making it more like the book. It's almost like it was meant to be.
And so, whilst we're changing plot things, we're changing some events, we're changing characters, we're losing characters, while we're doing all the normal stuff that you have to do to adapt a book, we did want to be as accurate as possible into putting his thematic material into the film.
Visualizing the story. Go to my storyboard and previz, making the images, making the words into images. Okay, let's check it out.
When you're doing 3 films back to back, the danger of the train derailing was huge. We knew we had to plan these movies as detailed as we possibly could, because there'd be very little room for error.
When Peter set out to start designing the film, he basically pre-visualized every shot. Sometimes with a high level of detail, sometimes just as a sketch.
It's to give everyone, including Peter, a good feel as to, okay, this is what the flavour of the film is, and he can then evaluate where scenes are running too long, even scenes that he may want to cut out entirely, all before he's wasting film, shooting actors and sets and having a crew costing tens of thousands standing around.
We knew we had to run a very tight ship, as it were, so that when we started shooting, we knew we'd get tired, we knew we'd get exhausted, that all sorts of pressures would descend on us, and we just had to have a great focused plan to be able to get us through each day.
When we were developing the movie, Peter spent an extensive amount of time committing the film in its entirety to storyboards.
And he ended up storyboarding all the films. Basically every frame we see in these films had already been storyboarded by Peter. And so we're able to work from visual reference.
The storyboarding process was the most basic form of pre-visualizing the film. It's 2D pencil drawings, single panels, nothing's moving. There's no real evidence of what the camera moves are going to be. You get an idea, okay, we pan from this character to this character, we tilt down from this object to that object. But we don't get any feel for how fast those camera moves are, or actually even the logistics.
Christian storyboarded most of the films that I made. I first met him when he was like a 17-year-old school kid.
When I'm storyboarding with Peter, I think I've got the luckiest job on the planet.
So you get a sort of an effect of the horses.
I sit down with him,
would be
and he describes
like
the shot to me. Usually I get it in the first drawing, sometimes I have to push it to 2. If it's a really difficult shot, I might have to just quickly do a third sketch.
Christian understands very much the sensibility that I have, and we started storyboarding as we were writing the script, so we didn't even wait for the script to be finished.
It's his way of checking that the ideas that he has for telling the story are going to work.
I mean, that is the single thing that I think storyboards are most valuable for me, is that they're a cheap pass at the movie. I get to make the movie at a really, really low cost for the price of a few pencils and some paper. But it effectively has put me through the process of making the film. As a director, I've had a go. I've done version number 1, and I can get to look at the movie complete.
Which was a great tool. It was never intended and never was the final version of the movie. I've worked with some directors who will storyboard their film, and you'll really see those storyboards on screen. Peter's not that director, that kind of a director. Peter uses it for inspiration, for communication with the departments, but you know that those storyboards are going to change. They're a starting point, not an end point for Peter. Not only doing the storyboards, but then having them shaded and then photographing them as an animatic.
We had made what we called an animatic, which was basically videotaping each frame of the storyboards.
The storyboards are all they're digitized, they're edited together as the shots will or would be edited together in the film, and it's basically a little black and white 2D drawing version of the film itself.
We'd got some local New Zealand actors together in a studio, and there was 5 or 6 actors, and they had read through the script in a recording studio, playing the different characters, and then those voice tracks had been edited with the storyboards.
What are you doing?
Fried eggs, sausages, and nice crispy bacon.
I've saved some for you, Mr. Frodo. You idiots! Put this out!
Was looking at a version like of the Lord of the Rings as almost like a comic book with words, and we put temp music with it.
You're seeing the storyboards as they pace in the film, as you want them to pace in the film, and so you get a feeling for the progression of story and the pacing of the storytelling.
Peter told us about it, and he was like, all right, I'll screen it for you before we start filming. And we all got to Pete's house, and he screened us this animatic, and it was a trip to read the script and talk about the script and get ready for the process of making the film, and then suddenly see a very rough compilation of those ideas put onto the screen. I mean, in some ways, we felt like we'd watched the film. What was great about that is the script was powerful enough that it actually came across and it resonated in that rough form.
And what we did on this movie, which I'd never done before, is I wanted to go one more stage with the storyboards and make them more accurate than they usually are. Grant Major would draw up the final plans for each set that had been designed.
Some of these were initially made into architectural models, which were made fairly quickly.
We ended up calling them animatic models, and we used them so that Peter could actually get a lipstick camera, get little toys. We get little figurines that we always had, like Hobbit size, human size, Balrog size. We had all these little toys. It was great. He could actually have them in this little, model that was either a reference point for the set or for a miniature down the road.
So the storyboards that he had done previously were expanded on shot by shot by the use of his camera working around our models.
And we'd have it hooked up to a video monitor that I'd have a freeze frame function on, and he'd say, okay, that's, sometimes you'd just sit there and you'd see him sort of, just pottering around, just trying to work out what kind of camera move he'd want to do for the shot, and you'd place the figures, and he'd, okay, that's the frame, I'd pause it and then draw from the screen.
Christian could actually sit there and go, okay, so you're thinking this frame, yeah, okay, and then he could actually sketch out the storyboard that was reflected on the monitor that actually, was to scale. That was showing something that had the figure to the background all to scale and made sense and could actually be replicated when you thought about what you were shooting on the set.
We basically knew that we were publishing a set of storyboards that were actually accurate, that this angle was here, and when we finally walked onto the set in a year's time with the actors and the full set was built, we'd be able to find exactly the same angle on set as we had with the miniature.
Early on, essentially the first set that was ever constructed was Bagan. Peter Jackson thought, hey, you know what we need to do is we need to go in there and get a video camera and I'm going to sort of work through kind of, the space and just get a feeling for it.
You will keep an eye on Frodo, won't you? Yes, I will. 2 eyes as often as I can spare them.
Scene 12, shot 1.
Awesome.
I was very worried about Bagan because I knew just how small the set was, and once you get 50 or 60 crew members in there, it's going to become cluttered very quickly and very difficult to work in. And so I wanted just to be able to really get my head into how we would shoot these scenes. And I'd done my little lipstick camera mock-ups with a cardboard model some months earlier, because we were also trying to figure out ways to shoot the scales too, because we had Gandalf being had to be tall, and Bilbo and Frodo happened to be small, and we were starting to get our heads into how we were going to shoot all this stuff. And I got a few of the people on the film. So we turned up on the Sunday on set with a video camera. I played Bilbo, and Rick Porras played something, and we sort of did a mock-up of the entire scene that we were going to shoot, ultimately with Ian McKellen and Elijah and Ian Holm. And then again, it turned out to be a relatively accurate. I mean, I think we made script changes eventually, so things altered a bit, but it turned out to be a relatively accurate version of what ultimately was in the film.
Through me, that ring would wield a power too great and terrible to imagine.
Beyond the storyboarding, we were in pre-production. Rick McCallum, the producer of Star Wars, came to New Zealand on a trip, and I was talking to Rick about the whole pre-visualization process, and they'd obviously basically developed their own previs department for Star Wars. And so Rick said, "Look, if you're ever in the States, come by and visit, and we'll show you what we've done." And so a few weeks later, we were in San Francisco and visited the ranch, and he was incredibly generous at just basically introducing us to their previs department.
Rick McCallum and George Lucas have been incredibly helpful to him and to the rest of us in terms of just offering him advice with some of these new approaches that they were doing. So Peter really grabbed a hold of this idea and said, "Hey guys, this is something we should be doing." So what we did was we went out and we searched for young, recent graduates of graphic art schools, and the kind of folks that love film and have a passion for film, maybe wanting to try to make a foray into the world of visual effects, and this could be an interesting opportunity for them.
Previs is doing about 144 shots from film one. The workshop and the art department provide the designs that we use in Previs to build in the computer. The shots that we're working on are effects shots and anything that Peter can't really get his head around, that he wants to take a look at it in the 3D environment. And that's what Previs is for, to help Peter create his vision.
Peter was very much present in previs, and he'd come in. Very exciting to him to see his movie coming to life and trying out the camera angles on sets that hadn't been built yet. First thing we did was the whole Khazad-dûm stair chase.
We built basically a copy of Alan's drawing sort of in 3D in a computer and began to experiment with angles and shots. The miniature of the staircase was also constructed by Richard Taylor. The actual miniature that ended up being used in the movie was one of the very first miniatures that Richard built, and so we were able to also use that miniature to plot a lot of camera angles and to plan it. And so, gradually over the course of possibly a year, this drawing of Alan Lee's had inspired and led to the creation of this hugely complicated, hugely expensive scene.
Peter cut out a lot of bits, but it was even wilder. You had Frodo's point of view going down the stairs, and it's like going, running like this and up at him and nearly falling off, all this close work on him. And in some ways, and tripping and falling and rolling down right almost to the breach and being grabbed at the end, looking over, and then the arrows start coming, It was wilder, but eventually it got to the point where, you got to cut somewhere. Too bad.
And obviously it's a fantastic tool, and it just became apparent, well, that's a tool I'm going to need to use to help create these films.
Christian Rivers storyboarded the film with me, which is sort of continuing. I mean, even today he's still working, doing storyboards for the 2000 Return of the King, and he's been working on this for probably, it must be nearly 4 to 5 years now. I find that scenes that were born in previs are often the more imaginative scenes, because you feel brave when you're just devising these crazy shots with little computers and stuff, but ultimately those crazy shots play an important part in defining the style of the film.
That's where I feel like I've been able
early storyboards. The prologue, the prelude, work pursuit into Lord Doran, Sauron. Huh. Okay. View sequence.
Elensula lumen ominentelvo. The world is changed. The beauty of the elves, children of Iluvatar, is fading from our world, passing beyond these lands into legend, into myth, into dream. But it was not always so. In the age of the stars were the firstborn awoken, and for many ages following did the high elves inhabit Middle-earth. Immortal, unchanging, they filled the world with music and light and enchantment, but they were created the fairest and wisest of all beings. There awoke two other races. The dwarves. Great miners and craftsmen who delved deep into the earth, working gold and jewels into countless treasures. In the age of the sun came men. Many were the bloodlines of this race, some weak and corrupt, some noble and just. Mortal men were still the children of creation. And so it was that evil, jealous of the mighty power of life, brought forth its own servants, hideous orcs, spawned in foul pits of pain and hate. And to command these profane forces was evil's greatest servant, the Maiar spirit Sauron, the Dark Lord. Sauron made a stronghold in Mordor and built Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower. From there he sought to bring all free peoples under the dominion of his darkness. In fair guise did he persuade the elves of Eregion to forge great rings of power. 3 for the elves, 7 for the dwarf lords, and 9 for the kings of men. And within each ring was wrought much of the strength and will to govern each race. But in secret, Sauron returned to his stronghold of Mordor, and in the fires of the Crack of Doom he forged his own ring. The One Ring to control all of the others. For power can be held in the smallest of things, and used for the greatest of evils. And so it was, at the close of the Second Age, a great battle was fought on the plains of Dagorland. The last alliance of men and elves drove Sauron's orcs back through the Black Gates into Mordor itself. Aeglas, the spear of Gil-galad, and Narsil, the sword of Elendil, held sway and darkness fled before them. Yet it was a dangerous victory. For on the slopes of Erodrin, the Mountain of Doom, Sauron himself was cornered. Some who were not born to die, whom age and disease could not touch, were slain. Gil-galad was slain. And Elendil fell. To show wisdom and honor were corrupted by malice.
Cast it into the fire, destroy it! Sauron's dead. Why destroy his ring? While the ring survives, his spirit lives. He will return. Stay away from me. Thus the third age of Middle-earth began. History became legend. Legend became myth. Some things that should not have been forgotten were lost.
Let's see.
We head for the woods of Lothlorien. It is the road Gandalf chose.
Curse their foul feet! Except they have entered Lothlorien, they will not leave it alive.
Interesting. Work pursuit into the story on. Well, okay.
grows late. Smoke rises from the Mountain of Doom. The shadow takes shape once more in the darkness of Mordor. And Gandalf the Grey rides to Isengard, bearing ill news. For that is why you have come, is it not, my old friend?
Interesting. The stairs of Khazad-dûm.
The bridge of Khazad-dûm! The gate is nearer!
Well. Alright. And ready to film. Huh.
Men, great kings of men. Men Sauron the Deceiver gave to them 9 rings of power. Blinded by their greed, they took them without question, one by one, falling into darkness. Now they are slaves to his will. They are the Nazgûl, ring wraiths, neither living nor dead.
incentives. Let's do it.
There was one, I think it was the weekend, I think it was like a Sunday afternoon, that was about a month or so before we were going to start shooting, and the set was standing there in the studio ready to go. And I got a few of the people on the film. Rick Porras, our co-producer, came along, and one of the special effects guys, and I was there, and we had our screenplay.
Peter could talk me and the rest of us into anything. Initially, he worked through. He said, "Okay, well, what we'll do is, I'll direct this stuff." We had Brian Van Tol do the camera work. Charlie McClellan, who was one of the visual effects producers at the time, he started off as Gandalf. And Randy Cook, our animation director, he played Sam.
Peter was playing, well, he wasn't playing Bilbo to start off with. I think he had Rick Porras playing Bilbo.
I definitely can't act to save my life. And, but I thought, okay, that's fine. I'll read for Pete just so that he can work through the angles. And we got to this point in the first scene, and Pete goes, "Cut." Great. Okay. So listen, what we're going to do next is I'll play Bilbo.
Of course. Just waiting for the right moment. Don't leave it too late. He's very fond of you. I know. Bilbo?
Ammo, Gandalf. I don't look it, but I'm beginning to feel it in my heart.
I think that's one of the best moments of cinematic history right there.
Scene 12, shot 24, take 4.
That was an extremely poor taste. You've kept that ring secret all these years. There was no need to go and make such an obvious display of it.
Oh, come on, Gandalf. It was just a bit of fun.
There are many magic rings in this world, Bilbo Baggins, and none of them should be used lightly.
Well, you are an interfering old busybody, but I expect you to rest as usual.
You mean to continue with your plan?
Yes, You will keep an eye on Frodo, won't you?
Yes, I will. 2 eyes, as long as I can spare them.
I'm leaving everything to of course, apart from a few oddments.
Everything?
Yes, of course.
The ring as well? Where is it?
In an envelope. There on the mantelpiece. No, wife. Look. Here it is, in my pocket now. Isn't that odd? Yet after all, why not? Why shouldn't I keep it?
I think you should leave it behind, Bilbo. Is that so hard?
Well, no. And yes, when it comes down to it, I don't feel like hiding with it. Why should I? What business is it with yours anyway? It's mine. I found it. It came to me.
There's no need to get angry.
Well, if I'm angry, it's your fault. That's mine. It's my own. It's my precious.
It has been called that before, but not by you.
Oh, that miserable wretch. So wicked. He would have killed me. He called me sneak, thief, liar. But it's mine.
Bilbo Baggins, do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks. I'm not trying to rob you, but to help you. All your long years we have been friends. Trust me as you once did. Let it go.
I will. The ring can stay here with Frodo with all the rest. Yes, well, I must be going. I really must be going. I'm late. The road is long.
Bilbo?
Yes?
The ring is still in your pocket.
Oh, good gracious. So it is.
We're
storyboarding. Okay, this is scene 12, shot 3, second half of the shot. Well, this is really quite simple. You take it, Gandalf. Here, it's yours.
Through me, that ring would wield a power too great and terrible. I would become like the Dark Lord himself.
Well, alright, we'll put it back in the trunk. It's not as if the Dark Lord is gonna come knocking on the door of Bag End. Is he? Is he, Gandalf?
I tried to find the creature Gollum. I looked everywhere for him, but the enemy found him first.
Shire? Baggins? That's gonna lead them straight here. Straight to me. Bang!
Samwise Gamgee, you've been eavesdropping.
I ain't been dropping no week, sir, honest. I was just trimming the hedge under the border of the window, if you know what I'm follow me.
It's a little late to be gardening, Samwise Gamgee.
I heard Mr. Frodo cry out. I was worried. Please, Mr. Gandalf, don't hurt me. Don't turn me into anything unnatural.
I think one of the remarkable things about reading The Lord of the Rings is you go into this world which is, you know, fairy tale. It's dragons and it's trolls and it's hobbits and it's elves. And it's amazing how authentic, genuinely authentic it feels. So you start to believe that it could possibly be history, that somehow Tolkien found some lost parchment and, you know, some secret parchment that we don't know about, that he really took all this from a true historical events. It has that degree of believability about it. I guess the way that we tried to hint at the depth, which is all that the film can really do, was partly in our design process. While we were working on the screenplay, we were able to start a team of people designing. Because the great thing about Tolkien is that all the descriptions and of what you need to build are in the book. You don't actually have to wait for the script to finish, unlike you would on a normal movie. I didn't want movie design. I didn't want fantasy movie Hollywood sort of style of design. I wanted something that felt authentic. I gave a little speech to the design crew very early on, where this is a little bit weird, but it was the only way I could really express myself. I said, look, we've been given the job of making The Lord of the Rings, but I want to, from this point on, I want to think that The Lord of the Rings is real, that it was actually history, that these events happened. And more than that, I want us to imagine that we've been lucky enough to be able to go on location and shoot our movie where the real events happened. Those characters did exist and they wore costumes, and I want the costumes to be totally accurate to what the real people wore. Hobbiton still exists. It's overgrown with weeds and it's been run down and neglected for the last 300 or 400 years, but we're going to go back in there and clean it up. We're the luckiest film crew in the world. We were able to shoot in the real locations that these real events actually took place in. And it was effectively my speech to try to get everybody's head into what I actually sort of wanted in terms of a feeling of reality. You basically start thinking about what the places and the characters look like, and you realize that there's 40 years of artwork that people have done. And out of all the illustrations, all the artwork that's been done in calendars and books and album covers and all sorts of things, the work of Alan Lee and John Howe impressed us the most. We had their artwork literally pinned on the wall of our office for 12 to 14 months while we were working on the screenplay. But I also thought it would be wonderful if we actually had these guys involved in the film as conceptual artists, because we had by this stage totally locked into their artwork. And I remember it was incredibly difficult to find Alan Lee, who's a fairly reclusive chap, and nobody really had a phone number for him. So we eventually tracked him down to a small village near Dartmoor in England. We put together a package and we FedExed us to this address, and we were tracking the FedEx. We were literally tracking the van moment by moment. Jan, our assistant, was on the phone and she was saying, right, the van's about 50 miles from the village. And then she phoned back, yes, it's arrived in the village, it's just looking for a street. And then we got a call back from FedEx saying, yes, so it's been delivered. And we knew at that exact moment that Alan had signed for this thing at his front door and he'd got it.
He sent over a copy of Heavenly Creatures, which I'd heard of, which hadn't seen, and enjoyed very much, with a letter telling me what he was up to, and asking if I'd like to get involved.
We thought, oh well, he'll probably get in touch in the day or two. Okay, well at least it's there. We'll just wait and see. And about 3.5 hours later, Alan phoned up. He got our phone number. He phoned up, and 3.5 hours he'd sat down. He'd watched Heavenly Creatures all the way through. He'd watched Forgotten Silver all the way through, and then he picked up the phone and spoke to me.
I didn't really need to think about it, actually. I just sort of said, yes, I'll come out.
And John Howe was similar. We tracked down John Howe, who lives in Switzerland. I spoke to John on the phone, and I was just nervous on these phone calls. I was just like a kid.
It was about 2 or 3 in the morning, because somebody in New Zealand hadn't really thought about what time it was in where we lived in Switzerland. And there was Peter and Fran on the phone, making a very, very sincere sales pitch for the project. And it was really a question of waiting for them to finish so I could say yes.
And then in the space of probably within 2 or 3 weeks, Alan and John were flying to New Zealand, and they actually met each other for the first time. These are two renowned Tolkien artists that had never met each other before. They met each other on the plane flying to New Zealand.
It started off very much on an illustrator's level, where it was nothing but pencils and paper, meetings, ideas, sketches.
And we joined in with Weta's team of designers as well, who'd already been working on the project.
A vital person in the design process was Richard Taylor, who's a New Zealander, and Richard's worked on almost every film that I've made, certainly since Meet the Feebles. And Richard has the most wonderful team of designers who work with him at Weta, and you know, as Alan Lee and John Howe were working on their conceptual design, so too were Richard and his team.
Initially, we had Alan Lee and John Howe working in our facility as well. Because they were here, we were able to utilise their immense knowledge of the world of Middle-earth and lift our young New Zealand designers to a level that was capable of accomplishing the massive task ahead.
I wanted Grant Major to design the film, and Grant had worked with me on Heavenly Creatures and The Frighteners.
New Zealand has never done a project on this sort of scale before. I'd never done a project on this scale before. So we were sort of breaking new territory a lot with the way we planned these things, and keeping a large amount of people motivated and able to meet deadlines and keep up a standard of work through a very, very long period of time.
I wanted Dan Henner to be our art director. We've done The Frighteners. You know, very important that those guys are part of the New Zealand film industry. They know how to get that stuff made and built here in New Zealand. The design process was a lot of fun. I would simply go and walk around and talk to them and give them thoughts, and you just narrow things down.
Peter will come in and we'll put a whole bunch of drawings up on the wall, a couple hundred drawings that we've been doing over the past few days.
We'd each have 2 or 3 different takes on any particular environment.
I sort of tend to like, I relate quite well to that as a silhouette of shape. I mean, I think it has a sort of elegance to it.
We start doing drawings, and we get a little way with the drawings, and then, you know, after based on the feedback that Pete gives us, we start going into sculpture.
It was like being in a toy shop, really, and just being able to say, oh, I want one of those, and one of those, and let's have 3 of those, and you know, and being able to sort of work all these designs out.
Occasionally you would do a single drawing and people would go, that's it, love it. That's great. Follow that line. Other times we would put up, in the case of the Urukai, a couple of hundred drawings before we got anywhere near what Pete was actually wanting.
You know, Peter's got a very good eye. You know, he knows what he's asked for, and when you've got to give him solid designs.
He would always find some positive aspect to everything that was done, but he would also be able to make you feel you weren't quite there yet. And you'd go away thinking to yourself, I've got to get this right. And it was really stimulating, really, really stimulating. And many, many times he pushed Alan and I much, much farther than we would have normally gone on our own in a design process.
We tried to give all the different cultures a very distinctive design. We wanted the dwarfish culture to be very, very distinctly different from the Gondorian or the Elvish.
Everything about the way that character's dressed, the way they move, the colours that they wear, the shapes that are on their clothing, on their weaponry, on their armour. We wanted to make it look like you could look at a piece of architecture and tell if it was Dwarven or Elven immediately just by looking at it. If you looked at a weapon and then you looked at the architecture, you could tell which cultures were the same and which were different. So that meant establishing iconic designs. It's graphic design really at its basic level. Dwarves at a basic level, their shapes are square, they're rigid, they're sturdy, very much like the character of the dwarves. The elven stuff, very lyrical, very beautiful, very sinuous, very elegant. So that kind of thought went into it, and into establishing very clear and identifiable graphic styles of all the different races that would carry through all their design influences.
We were also trying to hint at this whole notion of art history. Much of Middle-earth was actually constructed by the Númenóreans. So the bones of the architecture of Middle-earth were built by people who are no longer there. But some hint of this has to come through.
The idea of layers of civilization going back over thousands of years, which it's a very hard thing to do in a film or to achieve on a film set. But just by laying much more design into the development of every part of the film, whether it's props or costumes, armour or buildings, that we'd never actually really see on film, but its presence would be felt in some sort of strange way.
When I first came onto the film, I began the same day as Alan Lee and John Howe. I spent the time myself designing from an architectural point of view from the illustrations that John and Alan had done. Some of these were initially made into architectural models.
We have to get rid of, we're very careful, we have to get rid of some of these little thin, tendrily ones.
As Peter agreed with various stages of the design, we called it a lock-off, a PJ lock-off. He would say, yes, okay, proceed. And we would proceed to the next step. We had a little star-shaped stamp made, which had PJ approved on, because these approvals were very, very critical to us. We really weren't able to move on until he had seen and agreed to what we were doing. At about that time, we were having a series of meetings. We were pigeonholing things about what would become sets, what would become part set, part model, and then what would become part set, part model, and part computer graphic extensions. A lot of it was strategic design for how we were going to get to the point where we could start rolling the cameras, and start filming sets.
It's a pretty magical vista around here. There's no doubt. I think we should go and relocate into a couple of. I remember our first trip to the Hobbiton location, or the potential location at that point, and there was this great moment occurred when Alan Lee and John Howe pulled out their sketch pads. They always went everywhere with pencils and paper.
You could sit in that landscape and see Hobbiton, almost as if you could do an overlay in front of your eyes. And Alan and I sat down on the hill above Bag End and started to draw, because there was the perfect landscape for Hobbiton.
So we were actually drawing the landscape, but putting the hobbit holes and the gardens and the fields and everything.
They were transforming the landscape on paper, and I just thought this is a great moment. And I remember we had a video camera there, so I actually grabbed the video camera because I thought this has got to be on the DVD. And I grabbed the video camera and I actually filmed myself. I filmed some stuff of them, in this moment where they were sketching.
Yep.
Let me just get a close up in here, and then I'll let you get this still.
And the final look of the finished set, I don't know, a year later or whatever, was quite close to those original sketches.
The style of Hobbiton was first and foremost to be homely and familiar. So it has a kind of an Englishness to it that I think Tolkien would have liked us to use.
We talked to Peter and he said, why don't you know Hobbiton? We want Hobbiton to look beautiful. It's got to have long grass. It's got to look as though the grass has been there forever. It's got to have fruit trees with fruit on them. It's got to have hedges with leaves on them. It's a big place. How much lead-in time do you think you need to make it look as though it's always been there? Well, a year would be good. Okay, yeah, I think we could do a year, you know. And so we started planning from a very early age with Hobbiton that we would begin construction a year out from filming.
Okay, so today we're going to Hobbiton, and put it briefly actually, Peter, this is the first time Peter is having a look at our work. Since we found the location, we've conceptualised it with Peter's involvement back in Wellington. We've had builders up here, landscapers, and the army in here to build roads, and a huge amount of effort and time and money being spent on it without Peter actually having been here to vet it. We've been reporting back to him with as much as we can with photographs and videos and kind of verbal questions and what have you. But this is the first day Peter's actually going to see it, and it's going to be great because he's either going to like it or he's not.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, we just need to get a lot of bushes and sort of make it more wild and woolly and sort of overgrown. But are they a few little bushes that are going down there?
Gardens, sort of they're doing gardens.
Right.
But I've told them just to keep putting bushes in until Christmas.
Yeah.
It's all around the chimneys, all around this stone wall.
Yeah.
You know, along the fence lines and things ought to be
The
scrubbed.
fence lines, there should be stuff all around the fence lines, yeah, you don't want those to be too clean.
And as part of the sort of general process of building it, we built a model of it in our art department computer.
Parallel to this, we built a huge architectural model. It would have been, 4 or 5 metres square. This would have been about a year and a half out from filming.
Once we'd found the location and worked out what we required there, we had to shift 5,000 cubic metres of earth. We had to drain a swamp, fill it in, make the party field. We had to build a big oak tree above Bag End, and then of course we had to build some sort of little hillocks to have hobbit holes.
And we cut into our little hillocks the fronts of where the hobbit holes were going to be. We sowed grass over the hills. We planted little market gardens and we planted trees.
A little hobbit hole. Feel like knocking on the door and popping in for a cup of tea. Second breakfast, perhaps.
Once all these things have been planted, it was really a matter of keeping it all going, letting nature take its course over the year. It was a very long and organic process, designing and building it, but I'd like to think that the Hobbiton needed that scale of detail to work well.
John and I, obviously, we each had quite a backlog of work that we'd done with these stories, so there were certain images that Peter had really liked.
A good example is the front hall of Bag End, because Peter had in mind an image that I'd done for a map of the Hobbit several years before.
That was just the most brilliant image of what the inside of the Bag End front hall might be like. And I basically just said, look, this is what I want in a movie. I've been looking at this picture for like 2 years now, wondering what the rest of Bag End is like. So can you please draw me the rest of Bag End? And he did it, and that was a great thrill of saying, taking this hallway and then having the actual artist, John, extend it into all the other rooms.
Suggestion of something behind it. I think you need to anything detailed. Wells is a scenic artist, and he's doing the view from Strider's room at the Prancing Pony, and that's the view from the room.
Bree was a lot simpler to design than many of the other ones because it was relying a lot more on vernacular English period architecture. We built most of Bree as a set piece, so it only exists in one instance as a computer-generated wide shot. So we built it in what used to be an old Navy base here in Wellington, in Port Dorset, and used one or two existing streets on which to build the set.
We worked on making everything quite tall, quite thin, slightly off plumb as it were, so the buildings all felt as though they were leaning in over you. And then the Prancing Pony itself, that whole scale issue once again came into play, where all the tables and chairs were big, all the people were huge, you know, and our little guys were sort of slightly vulnerable, and so everything, there was a darkness, a slightly gothic edge to Bree.
The Weathertop Hill was actually quite difficult to find that location. It's described as being a hill like a cone, and the one that we found for the movie actually doesn't quite fit that description, but it's more interesting, and we just thought that this was a wonderful weathertop. We just had to put ruins on the top of the hill.
It's the possible western Weathertop Hollow, and there's the escape vehicle cast on the muddy road. Oh, it's going to be a long walk.
So the ruins and the wide shots are just put in with a computer, but when the hobbits are actually within that circle of ruins, they are in a studio set.
Basically, it's a ruined tower that once held one of the Palantirs. We've built, really, from Tolkien's basic description of the ruins of a circular tower. We've added these statues, which they're not complete yet. They're going to be more broken down. I've never done this before. And the figures were sculpted by Brigitte, who's one of our very talented sculptors. But as a sculptor, she's probably not the person to be actually attacking them and aging them down. I guess they just sort of represent some element of the kind of the age of this place, but they're also kind of like a brooding presence, a kind of foreboding of what's about to happen. Spectators, really, of the events that can unfold in this arena.
Isengard comes directly from an illustration of Alan's, which Peter loved so much he wanted exactly the same, but Alan had only drawn the bottom portion.
I always looked at that painting wondering what the rest of the tower was like. You know, I just wondered how high is it and what's the top of it like. And so it was just such a brilliant painting. And so the day finally arrived, I could say to Alan, can you paint me the rest of the tower? Please, can you show me what the rest of it is like?
It is described as being black by Tolkien, so we chose obsidian volcanic glass as the element that it had been made from. So we wanted to give it a sharp, blade-like, hard, aggressive quality.
We built the structure out of a normal framework in polystyrene, and then we coated it with a hard coat, black hard coat, and then a clear hard coat. So we built up the sort of layers of lacquer virtually to give it a depth, so at the pointy edges you could see through it. And then we waxed it, which gave it even more sort of texture to the depth.
There was a lot of different elements in that design, and everything feels like it belongs in that one place. And it was another really satisfactory set to work on. It wasn't a place I particularly wanted to spend the night, but it would be a nice place for a very sophisticated cocktail party. At the moment I'm just trying to draw this as a landscape, just exactly as I would if I were sitting in a wood drawing something for pleasure, and then kind of adding in the various architectural elements that I'm kind of making up as I go along, really. I'm just trying to get a feeling of the place as it is and its potential as a sort of as a place for the elves.
How do you define a culture which could be eternal, that could be forever perfecting itself? You have to search for some form of simplicity which can allow you to stop evolving and find that perfect line.
It's the use of natural forms. It's the use of flowing, graceful lines. There are kind of elements of Art Nouveau and Celtic design. But it is quite an intuitive, enigmatic thing. It's not something that's easy to kind of pin down. As a Rivendell, I think I was trying to create a place that I'd want to retire in. It's just this ideal environment in a beautiful Lost Valley. And the whole thing would feel slightly kind of melancholic and quiet. And also this, you get the sense that it was a centre of learning, that there'd be libraries and statues, works of art.
The Rivendell exterior sets were built in a small regional park called Kaitoki, just north of Wellington.
It's a sort of peculiar set in that it's inside out, so the trees grow inside the buildings are built around the trees. It's very much as Lothlorien was at one with nature, at one with its sort of foliage.
And we made a model of the woods and placed every tree, and then just made a small scale version of the buildings, and just worked out a way that we could place the buildings in a way that wouldn't damage any trees, and that the buildings would have kind of openings which allowed for the trees to grow, so that you'd feel that the trees had grown up around these buildings which had been there for 1,000 years or so. Yeah, it's just one of those places that I personally wanted to spend a lot of time. I even thought about sleeping overnight in Frodo's bed, but I don't think the props people would have been quite happy about that. The next major thing was the interiors of Elrond's chamber and the council chamber, which was built in the studio. And again, that was a very lovely set.
The dressing of Elrond's house reflects Elrond having this world-renowned library in his house. It also forms in part a museum of all these significant events, and in particular the fall of Barad-dûr for the first time, and the loss of the ring. So this is manifested in a lot of sort of prop detailing, but most of all in Narsil, the broken sword is present as a centerpiece in this museum, and also along the walls are a series of paintings or frescoes, one or two of them done by Alan Lee.
They basically were the history of the elves, and the most beautiful, stunning pieces of artwork. The boats that they arrived in, the making of elven rings. The centerpiece is Sauron smashing Narsil, and then there's various other pieces of elven history on either side.
The Mines of Moria was probably the most studio-based out of everything we had done to date. We used miles and miles and miles of rock work. There's various layers of occupation, you could say. And there's this natural layer of rock. There's this dwarven layer. There's this orcish layer that we see more and more of as we go through. There's this destruction layer where battles have happened, battles have been lost. You know, the closer we get to where the Balrog lives, the more smashed up it is.
The dwarvish architecture we decided was going to be entirely geometric, that there wouldn't be any curves or any rounded forms, any round arches, so that it would all feel very kind of crystalline. And that design ethic was kind of followed through into the armour and the weapons and every aspect of the dwarves, really. I think they're big people at heart. They were, had a grand civilization, and it just felt right that they would build enormously impressive structures.
Much of it's manifested through model work. As soon as we go mega wide, obviously that's way bigger than what we could afford to build and our studios could accommodate. So, the CG and model work plays a large part in the immensity of the Mines of Moria.
I had drawn the Dwarf chamber before with arches and rounded columns, but I'm thinking in a little bit more detail about these.
Stairs and across the bridge of Khazad-dûm. And Alan Lee went away and drew the stairs. And what he brought back to me was kind of pretty mind-blowing. It was more than just what I was imagining a staircase to look like. It was this incredible cavern, an image of this cavern with this narrow staircase on the top of this huge viaduct-like kind of pillars.
In the course of drawing that, I thought, well, I'll just make a little break or two in that staircase, and then Peter really latched onto that.
I just looked at this hole in the stairs, and I started to sort of imagine other things happening around that hole, and that really was the seed of what ultimately became, one of the most extended sort of action set pieces in the entire movie. The script still says to this day, the Fellowship run downstairs towards the bridge. That's all that it says.
Over the bridge! Forward!
Good morning, Paul.
Hello.
What are you working on?
Caris Galadon, the Lothlorien Woods, where the elves live. There's going to be a little Frodo and...
Tolkien's descriptions of Lothlorien are amongst the most beautiful and enigmatic writings in his work. So it was really quite a big challenge trying to come up with something that would match those. I wanted Lothlorien to be, obviously Elvish, but to have a distinctly different feel. And the fact that it's built up in treetops is obviously going to be a huge part of that difference. We also wanted it to feel slightly more unworldly, otherworldly, and more mysterious, and probably a more kind of spiritual place, as though Lothlorien is the spiritual heart of the elven kingdoms on Middle-earth.
We needed to find a forest that had that beautiful magical essence to it, but also had these huge trees, which of course we don't have huge trees quite like these in New Zealand, so we had to build some trees. And we did it up at Paradise with a beautiful moss-covered ground and the beech forest, and then we built 5 huge, like 16-foot diameter trees that went up 40 feet high into the air. Once they've made contact with the elves, you move on into Caris Galadon, this is where the Malon trees are. So we built essentially built the Malon trees in the studio, and gave them great big root structures that the guys could have a little settlement under, their sort of pavilion. I think there was that essence that the elves were at one with nature, with the forest, they were part of it, as opposed to being dominating it. They were working with it. Whereas we would have gone in with a chainsaw and cleared a place and built a house, they've done the opposite. They've gone in and worked with the trees and added staircases and put in flats that they could live on, in perfect crotches of trees, things like that.
Galadriel's Glade was quite a nice little set. This was our first look at the actual Lothlorien trees, and was trying to kind of establish the look of the roots and everything. And follow that through with the design of the plinth and the bowl and the vase, and it was very nice actually seeing that scene coming together. Galadriel has always been a hugely important character for me in the books, so to see Cate Blanchett standing in Galadriel's Glade, it's very, very nice, very exciting.
We're at the Silverlode Riverbank in Featherston, which is where Galadriel gives all our hobbits and the Fellowship we present as they leave Lothlorien. We built a bit of a malorn tree here, 6 meters high and about 6 meters in diameter, with roots that run out into the lake, so that we can pull up our boats into the roots. To build it, we did a timber frame, put chicken mesh and foil over that with hessian on it, then plastered the whole thing, then given it all a coat of paint in the rain. We've eventually ended up with a really interesting texture there that could look 1,000 years old.
From the moment we see the Argonaths of the Númenóreans, as they were in the Second Age, now the Argonaths were like two sentinels on the outside of one of the approaches to this huge empire.
We wanted to give the feeling that we were, we were entering the realm of this very, very ancient civilization, long past its prime. It's like kind of ancient Rome or Egypt or Mesopotamia.
It's almost as if you're digging things out of the ground rather than actually creating them.
The ruins themselves are based on the architecture of men, some of which we had seen before, for example on Weathertop. So we kept back a lot of our ruined pieces, knowing that we were going to need them later on in the filming. And we made a few new ones, like this gigantic face that was lying on its side.
The seeing seat itself at the top has got these eagle motifs, suggesting that because eagles have this acute vision, that's kind of connected with what Frodo is going to see. New Zealand doesn't have a lot of ancient stones and stuff around the landscape. Everything had to be introduced, and it's mainly made of polystyrene. But I think it, did the trick really. It just made you feel that you were in a very, very ancient land.
Are we going to have like sort of big pumpkins and sort of stuff, and where you have a little guy kind of who's just scored a good cheap bloody buy?
Propping for the film was an industry in itself. The film demanded a particular type of prop that you just don't get in the prop shops or antique shops. So we had to build up our own props department and build everything from scratch. We also had to do it because of scale. We were constantly needing to duplicate different props at different scales.
A huge amount of stuff had to be made, and it meant designing everything, the whole thing. Absolutely crazy. But I think this is one of the strengths of The Lord of the Rings, is because everything had to be designed. There were no shortcuts. There was no sort of going out and picking something off a shelf. Had to put a bit of thought into it.
We've lengthened that, put a bit more of a curve in it, and straightened the bowl, so you've got it down in this sort of position. The bowl is actually straight.
That's good. Looks good.
Every pipe, every chair, every cup, saucer, glass, everything was designed specifically for the film. So we had to make it.
We did have to look for people with these sorts of skill bases within the community, people who could make the One Ring. Those sorts of things were contracted out to craftspeople, silversmiths, art makers, saddlery makers.
We got a glass blower and we got some furniture makers and some wood carvers. A chap who could make clay pipes, coopers to make barrels and buckets, wheelwrights to make wheels for wagons. It starts off at the conceptual area, but it works right through down to the ground level. Guy who's applying the aging to a wooden bucket to make it look as though it's carried water for 300 years, you know.
Yeah, just doing these little buttons that in 2 scales for this chest here, little babies, and getting them exactly the same.
And finding these sorts of people who are willing to work day and night for a year, 2 years to make the amount of props we needed was huge.
As a props department, art department, we took responsibility for the ring. Had it made by an absolutely wonderful master, silversmith, goldsmith, Jens Hansen. Something like 15 rings made of that sort of vaguely fell into the description that Peter had given and Tolkien had obviously written about. So Rick Porras, our co-producer, was there during one of these discussions one day about the ring. And
the next day we ended up shooting this little sequence where we all sort of played these different characters, and we needed a prop, so I pulled off my wedding ring.
And action. Frodo!
When we were done, I said, Pete, I actually think that, obviously I'm biased, but I really like the way my wedding ring looks.
And, everyone loves their wedding ring. But anyway, it had a sort of shape to it that just had a nuance that was slightly different from the others. And so we took that with us the next time we went to Jens Hansen to talk about the design of the ring. And
making some adjustments after that, they kind of rounded it off a bit, but sort of they used that as, I guess, a basic starting point for the one ring.
And action.
It's been a huge kind of collaborative process all the way through, and there hasn't been a great kind of division of your labour, and so you've had people who might have been brought on as painters who suddenly find themselves for hundreds of thousands of years.
Being able to think of it and see it as something that is real certainly made it real. And now it does exist, it does exist somewhere.
Weta Workshop was kind of like visiting some wild fantasy land. It's like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory but without the candy.
I went to the Weta Workshop, which is quite unlike anything I've ever seen in my entire career, and they made everything you see in the film. They made all the armor, all the weapons. Richard Taylor, man in charge, I think he's a genius.
He's built this workshop that is world-class in every respect.
Richard Taylor has also been one of the single most important people involved on this production, because Richard has, with enormous dedication and enthusiasm, taken on one of the most difficult jobs.
We chose to look after the design, the fabrication, and the on-set operation of the special makeup effects and prosthetics, the armour, the weapons, the creatures, and the miniatures.
I think Richard made over 45,000 different items for the film, including the miniatures and the prosthetics.
So his workload over the 3 or 4 years that he has been involved has just been phenomenal.
He's a very charismatic guy, so a very great leader. So his people were really devoted to him and to the task, and their work showed it.
Employing mainly young people whose primary expertise was not in filmmaking, but whose talents have been recognised by Richard Taylor because they were artists of one sort or another.
The Weta Workshop is very much a physical and spiritual extension of Richard Taylor and Tanya Roger, because it embodies every molecule of philosophy of Richard's work ethic.
So where do I start? Peter has told me that he wants to make Lord of the Rings, and a great fortune for us, he wants to make it with us. How do I inspire in this young group of New Zealand designers and technicians the philosophies and the vision that will carry this film for 5 years and deliver it onto the world stage in a way that's worthy to the written literature of Tolkien? Gathering around us a like-minded group of young New Zealanders, I very much believed, as I do today, what I said to them then. If you couldn't rise to the highest level of enthusiasm, passion, and professionalism and grasp this task as if it was the most important thing that you have ever taken on in your life, you weren't worthy of the task. We had been blessed with the opportunity to bring a piece of modern English folklore to the screen. So often in fantasy filmmaking, it's necessary that the actor occasionally turns to the audience and throws them a wink. You know, just buy into this, just accept that this world exists. That couldn't happen with The Lord of the Rings. It was imperative that Middle-earth was real.
Kind of like a prehistory to English and European history, that it did exist at one point. And since he was treating it that way, he was looking at it as a history, that really kind of worked its way through every fabric of the production.
But what we appreciated was that if we could hold on to a large number of the departments, we could possibly make a more cohesive approach through our design work and the delivery of the images that we put on screen.
Richard Taylor's philosophy was always ground this in reality. We want gritty realism. We're making a historical film, we're not making a fantasy film. To that end, we looked at a lot of historical influences. While we didn't want to make it obvious, like you go, oh look, the elves are Greek, or the dwarves are this or that. And we didn't want to make it obvious like that, because that's not what we're doing. What we wanted to create were alternative cultures that look like they could come straight out of history, but you're never quite sure where they're from.
The development of the cultures, the species, and the races. The development of the total physical reality of the creatures was imperative, so that this finely woven tapestry would create a backdrop of heightened reality upon which the actors could play out this incredible story.
There are so many races and cultures in Lord of the Rings, and it would be very easy for many of us as designers who are familiar with the material to really indulge ourselves a little bit in it and just develop these cultures to the nth degree. But what we needed to do was really make them so they were accessible to general audiences who hadn't read The Lord of the Rings as well.
Daniel seemed to grasp everything that was good in Middle-earth. All the elves, the beautiful swords that the elves carry. He was able to design the richness of the cultures of these particular characters. But brooding underneath the harsh cloud of Mordor on the other side of the room